earlier this year. We are extremely excited to get to have you here so recently after receiving that. Cary is one of the top master saddlemakers in the country, whose work is just phenomenal, and we're going to get to hear about his process today. Cary was featured in the West episode of Craft in America, which aired in the last year, and it's streaming. Watch on craftinamerica.org, PBS channel, our YouTube channel, and with that, we begin. Thank you so much.
After people do all these flowery words and introductions, I'm tempted to say, don't believe everything she said. So, thank you for coming in. The staff here at Craft in America, it's been a fun time working with the folks here. So I feel like I should explain my appearance. I've got the remnants of a black eye. Flying to LAX a couple of days ago, and then rumors were that there was some domestic disturbance or perhaps a bar fight, and the rumor mill got started, so I thought maybe we should nip that in the bud right now. No, it was nothing that exciting. It was a big old pair of pliers at home in Idaho that got away from me. Just so you were curious. Anyway, I thought we'd start off with a little bit of a history lesson on leather. Leather's been around many thousands of years. The internet tells us it's about 7,000 years, give or take. To me, in the history of mankind, that sounds like not much time, does it? And so, if they say 7,000 years, it's probably one of those things where it was discovered serendipitously, where perhaps an animal fell dead in a pool of water and a tree fell over, and the tannins from the bark, which is where the tannins, where we tan leather, that comes from. And somebody happens along and they, put two and two together and suddenly start the experimentation process. And Chef Herman, Terminal Clothes Company, Steve, Chef kind of relays that story and there's how it began its journey through mankind. So, and then we forward to about 5,300 years ago, and you've all heard of the Iceman, the Lucy guy that was discovered, what, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, on that Chicago side of the Alps, and he's older that leather clothing, hair-on clothing, got leather shoes on, quivers. So, excuse me, that he is the oldest complete specimen that we have of humankind in Europe. And so he was a user of leather, and Chef also tells me that, of course, Chef now passed away, that Genghis Khan in the 12th century, when he was crossing Europe with his siege, march, or whatever it was called, he had a tanner on wheels that they took with his entourage in order to obviously supply his troops, his henchmen, with all the footwear and clothing and the like. So that was how important leather was in those days. So we also found out from the Harwood folks that Okay, first slide here on our little dissertation. Anybody know who this is? Joseph, you know who that is.
Annie Oakley.
That's Annie Oakley. Little sure shot. So this is a famous photograph that I used in some leather work here some time ago. Not sure why we're not advancing. You have to have some tech support. Click on the image. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Good. So I had an idea to render this photograph in a pyrographic image. This is done with a handheld pyrographic tool that's got I guess you wouldn't call it a rheostat, but a variable temperature setting on it. So this is my practice piece, and thought I'd show you that. Whoops, what happened? We may need more tech support here. There it is. Okay. So I rendered this. This is my second try. So that was a handbag that appeared in our TCAA show about 3 years ago, I think, two or 3 years ago. So pyrography is one of those things that's actually been around, of course, for a long time. And so I decided a couple of years ago to just take it to the next level. And frankly, I've been inspired by a lady that I've been following on Instagram from South Korea, of all places. And she's doing just fabulous work. So here's another piece that I did. I believe this was in last year's show. Wasn't this last year's show, Jason? So this is Big Red. This is Secretariat winning the Belmont by 31 lengths in 1973. So the most famous racehorse in the history of racing. And I rendered that, as you see, into a fairly thin leather panel right there. Let's see where we put that. Oh, this thing is pretty sensitive. So you can see this is a briefcase that is, add a little bit of spirit-based dye to present a kind of a subtle color to this, and inlaid it into this briefcase panel. And that panel has been antiqued, floral carved and antiqued. And so there we go. Now I've got the hang of this thing. Need to be not so heavy-handed with my advancing here. So this is another TCAA piece. Got a very simple motion. I was talking to somebody earlier, Jason, I guess it was. We were talking about simple motion. Simple motion is a coherent, understandable motion. And as I've matured, I suppose, if you will, as a craftsman and artist, I've found that simplicity is definitely something that the temptation is get more complicated in order to show off some skills or something like that. But a simple motion, as you can see, and this is just a mirror image right here, and that's been, the flowers are a little bit lighter colored because I put some lacquer on those as we say, a resist, so that the antique doesn't adhere to those areas quite as much. So this is the back of the same folio, and a little bit of pyrography going on there as well. So even though these are simple motions, we can always infuse interest by making things more complicated after you establish that basic motion. Not all work has what we would call motion, though. And so this has just been the style that I've subscribed to that shows, I like to see movement. It creates interest. And this is another folio. This is in this year's TCAA show. So this is the cover of it. And I've also done a little bit of airbrushing around the outside of it, and asymmetrical design. And I guide the students that I teach into studying the area to be filled. The area to be filled is giving us clues. That's the starting point of how do we figure out what's going to look good in this area to fill. And if it's symmetrical, that nudges me more toward a symmetrical type of treatment. So this is a symmetrical project from a couple of years ago. I collaborated with my partner, Scott Hardy, on some silver on this thing. And this is a molding process that I engaged in on this little clutch purse. This thing's only, I don't know, probably 8 inches by 4 or 5 inches, something like that. There it is. This thing is coming together. The entire thing was hand sewn, and those are magnets to fasten the lid down. Let's see what it looks like with the lid down. Well, it opened up, and that's some Scott Hardy high relief filigreed silver right there. And like I said, entirely hand sewn. So I become kind of a junkie for hand sewing. Back in 2009, I spent a few weeks in France learning from a classically trained leatherworker over there. And that pretty much kind of poured gasoline on the fires of hand sewing that I so enjoy. So here's an example of, we've got a symmetrical form here, but an asymmetrical design. And so it's, as I've said many times, with these guidelines that I have for what will look good within a confined space, a particular shape, those are only guidelines. So we talk about, we have to know the rules of art in order to know when to break them. So anyway, this is a saddle bag that went on a saddle that was a commission piece that went to, of all people, he was a mounted police officer in the city of Seattle. And after we finish up here, I've got some of the original artwork, including this piece on where it all started on paper. And so I was able to craft this out of, and this was all at the behest of my customer. This was all his idea, and he told me, I want a cat in a hat saddle. You might ask, well, why would a mounted policeman have a cat in the hat saddle? And it was a very interesting guy, and he said, I want to connect with kids. And I thought, isn't that cool? He wants to connect, he wants to build a relationship with those people on the street. And he thought this would be one way he could do that. So I thought that was a worthy goal. So not exactly what we would call a cowboy saddle, yet nonetheless a very worthwhile project. So this is another pyrographic image, just the bronc. I didn't do the graphic design on this poster, but this is our little hometown rodeo. Was asked by a lady who manages much of the goings on with the rodeo, the media and so forth, and asked me if I'd come up with something. The image I got from the internet, Mary Peters, a rodeo photographer in Montana, had this image and I thought it would work for us. So, and the original for this then I placed in the Trappings of Texas show, and it sold last year in the Trappings of Texas show. Oh, this is an image. Anybody know who this is?
Hamilton Roundup, not Yakima Canuck, it's the other one.
Close.
Not John Spade, I'm missing the third guy.
Native American,
Yeah,
Jackson Sundown.
that's a Jackson said
Jackson Sundown was the name that they called him, not his Nez Perce name, of course, but a famous rodeo cowboy back in the early 20th century, and a really, really good hand. And of course, as we know that there was some resistance for Native Americans competing against the white boys and stuff, but he came back, I think he was in his 50s, and competed in the saddle bronc riding in the Pendleton Roundup, one of the great rodeos in the country, and won it. And you can see that he's got a belt buckle on. I think that could be the belt buckle that he won. And these famous woolly chaps. And I rendered this photograph in leather. It's kind of got a reflection in there, but this is in this year's TCAA show. Jay Adcock, my friend, braided the rawhide string that you can see going encircling the oval around there. And so that I just thought it would be a good way to commemorate that intersection of the Native American culture and cowboys. Interestingly enough, the logo of the National Cowboy Museum, the little logo that you've seen probably before, that's Jackson Sundown at the National Cowboy Museum. So
nailed those shafts because they're really hard to get that three-dimensional effect with the Pinto woolies. That's great. The shafts.
thank you.
Outstanding.
That was a lot of fun. So take a look at that kind of vignette, that leaf structure right in the middle of the image right there. It's a French Baroque era. This was just on the cover of a book that I have of illustrations coming from that era. And I borrowed this idea. Take a look at that leaf that's kind of halfway hidden in the middle of that. And that's my interpretation of that leaf. So this is an example, I think, of taking a real a form, that basic movement that I was talking about earlier, and infusing some interest by making it a lot more complicated. So I swapped things around with this. So the flowers, usually those are the most complicated focal points, if you will. I decided to make the flower simple, a simple 3-petaled flower, and make the leaves really, really complicated. So this panel appeared in the Britton Museum show that Jim Jackson, another NEA fellow from Sheridan, Wyoming, put on a show at the Britton Museum, and I was honored to be invited to be a part of that. So this is just a part of the panel that I had in there. This panel is on display in the Britton Museum in Wyoming as we speak.
Wow.
So this is a recent project. Anybody have an idea what kind of leather that is in that cushion?
It's beaver tail.
Beaver tail, yes it is. Good old North American exotic leather. And I have to piece it together because they don't make beaver tails quite wide enough in order to do that. So anyway, you can see that the cantle binding around the rim of the cantle right there, it's wet, so it's a little bit darker, been glued on there, and it's prepared to dry overnight, and then is to be sewn the following morning. And there it is sewn. So and the sewing, I'm kind of an old school type. I like linen thread, waxed linen thread. This particular yellow thread is sourced from the UK. It's actually made in Great Britain. So this is the same saddle after it's been oiled. Haven't quite got everything buttoned up on it, but it gives you some idea of that progression of how things happen with that kennel binding on there. And getting a richer color once it's spoiled. So leather, especially the bark tan type leather that we use, Herman oak leather, tanned in St. Louis, is likened unto clay. It's highly moldable. It's a very dry tannage, so it receives moisture very readily. And it has to be in order to do all the things that we ask of it, as far as the molding and shaping and whatnot that we have to do on these saddles. There's another picture of the same front. This is what we call a swell fork. And there it is, all shaped down. So it takes, that can be quite a wrestling match to get all of that shaped down on there with a minimum amount of wrinkles, and hopefully no wrinkles that would appear in the finished saddle. So here is a fairly recent project. I have a customer who had this font. This is I don't know if it's a brand or a business logo. I think it's his business logo that he had. Sent me a picture of it, and I rendered it and wound up putting it in saddle horn. I think this was a larger version, and wound up cutting it in there with a swivel knife. Some of you know all about a swivel knife. Jason was gracious enough to bring a swivel knife, so it's just a handheld knife like so, and the barrel that swivels like that. Some of you are leather workers, you know all about that. And there it is with a little more floral decoration around it. This is a saddle I made a couple of years ago, but you can see where it starts on paper, pencil there, and where it winds up on the fender right there. But every one of those lines is hand cut. And then we've got a series of stamping tools with the different textures and so on and so forth there. So the saddle from actually quite a few years ago. This went to Southern California to a team roper, no less, who was, he always had the same tree, the same red seat. And so we built this for him, and he liked maple leaves, not something we do very often. But I want to invite you to take a look at those scrolls. See the scrolls in there? And how strategically they're placed. You got one right in the middle, and then there's a circle of scrolls. You just focus on just the scrolls. So these are some of those, I guess you might call subliminal things that we try to create interest by having some of these things occur in our work. How are we doing on time? We're doing okay.
You only have 3 or 4 more days.
So this is the last saddle I made for the TCAA show in Oklahoma City. Once again, did a deep dive into the pyrography on this. Chose some Charles M. Russell paintings and attempted to render those in various panels in the saddle. You can see the image there on, I guess it'd be the left-hand side for me. I suspect it is for you too. And up in the corner there, and then I had to size it with the black and white image above the leather in order to get it to work within the space that I had dedicated for it. This is just beginning. That's the little handheld, just like a pen. And it's got you can put a variety of different tips on the end of it, a rounded one, a sharp point, or a spoon type shape for shading, different things like that. There's the same image a little bit further along. That's a pretty sharp point on that. With these small images to get detail, it takes a very fine point in order to get that detail. And I feel like I've done a lifetime worth of preparation in order to do this, because I do a lot of sketching. I sketch broncs and all kinds of things. Well, what's different about this than say pen and ink is the heat aspect of it. So it's like a branding iron. If the harder your press, of course, the deeper it goes, and the longer you hold it there, the darker the value, the darker the color. And so that takes a while to kind of get used to that. And then all while you're adjusting the temperature on this thing. And the thing that kind of blindsided me was, so you get a carbon buildup on that tip and it'll cool it. And what's wrong with this thing? And you keep going, all of a sudden that carbon flakes off, and then it's hot right now. So there's a bunch of different dynamics in using it that really complicate getting this done in a way that will work for us. Looks like we're pushing it a little bit further. And there. So this is, I forget the name of this. Some of you may recognize this painting, but we got a guy with his team, and that noisy carriage coming along behind him is disrupting the process, and the wife got a baby. And oh, I know what this was. I remember now what this was, an illustration, a painting for the promotion of the seatbelt for a wagon like this. And you can imagine, well, yeah, perhaps would need a seatbelt in this kind of a wreck situation. So there's the rendered piece on the left side, and it's going to go inside that open space. So I have to cut that out and inlay it in a way that, this is the bottom of a tapadero. You're familiar, I think there's tapaderos on a saddle in the other room here. There they are. So I used chestnut Herman oak leather and antiqued it. So I wound up with this very rich, dark color, and did not oil the panels so that they were able to pop. They made them very visible. The saddle was in the 2024 TCAA show. So I thought I'd show you, this is my little shop trailer that I have on the ranch. Full solar system, you can see part of it in the background right there because we're off the grid. And this tree is ready for a seat. So I've got the skirts that are blocked out on there in a position where they will be permanently later on. And there's a piece of leather. So just a big old block of about 27 inches square piece of leather. And it's been soaked, and when I'm at the ranch, I dunk it in the creek. Goes in the creek, runs right by my little shop trailer. So that's where this molding process takes place. So this is the first time I put the leather on, and you can sort of see where there's kind of a bubble that's getting worked up into the middle of the seat. So we're gathering leather into that middle part of the seat. And so we'll after we make our final cuts, our pattern type cuts, and it's drawn down with a strap like this. Interestingly enough, this saddle stand right here and the newer one that I have back at my headquarters were both mortician stands. This one happens to be mechanical. It's got a hand crank with an all thread, raises and lowers, that puts pressure on that strap, is strapped down to the base. And the other one I have is hydraulic. So it's probably an antique too, but so this is that same seat, and drawn down here, making sure that everything is in the correct position before I put the the inlaid beaver tail leather in there, and before I've floral carved into the dish of the candle here. Well, that's what it looks like on the carving bench in the shop trailer. Got a big opening there where that cushion will be. I use neoprene for the cushion on that. And there it is with that beaver tail in there. Very, very rugged leather. And these are tanned locally up in the valley that I live in. And and I've been making bucking rolls out of, some of you know what bucking rolls are. I've been making those out of beaver tail leather since about 1986. And now I see people all over making out of that stuff. So the seat is in permanently. Looks like the candle binding has been, you can see this is back at headquarters. I got my hydraulic stand. That's the mortician stand right there. And you may be able to pick up that the fork, now that the seat is in, that fork has been dampened and it's being prepared for flower stamping as the while the leather is on the tree, whereas most of the pieces are done, well, as we see on the rock on the. So that kind of concludes some of the work in progress stuff. This was I just threw this in as a addendum here that, as you know, that as Emily said, the NEA folks came out in June, did their little film, and this is our great room at our home in Salmon. And so I'm still amazed that Chip that down. That was a 2-hour interview right there, and along with all the other things that they did. And they've got this little postage stamp of a clip of a film, 6 or 7 minutes long or something like that. So anyway, what I also wanted to do is demonstrate a little bit of carving. It's like we're right on track with our time. Not carving, drawing. So when we teach drawing classes, first of all, has anybody here ever heard of gesture drawing? Oh. Only because I taught you, right, Jason?
Yes.
There we go. So gesture drawing, and the second question, and I'm probably not going to pronounce his name correctly, but Hyman Nicolaides, The Natural Way to Draw, is the book that was republished, I think, after he passed away. But he was art educator in the Northeast many, many years ago. And he's the one that, I don't know if you could say he pioneered this concept of gesture drawing, but he certainly was the first prominent one who would teach it on a formal basis. And gesture drawing basically is trying to learn how to draw what the thing is doing rather than drawing the thing. I know that sounds sort of esoteric, but it's when I set people down to draw something, oftentimes, and Kevin, you probably remember this, I do a little, okay, draw me a flower. And for the most part, people were taught, like we did the 4th graders yesterday, oh, you draw very, very carefully and precisely. And it's for lack of better terms, it's actually kind of a constipated way of drawing. So how do we battle that? What Nicolaides talked about was, rather than draw a very precise circle, we'll draw a circle like this. And that would represent where perhaps a flower might be located in our design. So maybe we want a flower center like so. And already it looks like a flower. And how much time have I got committed? Almost nothing. And So the process, and he unpacks this in this book, and that's the way, he probably doesn't say it this way, but what it is a, you're feeding yourself visual information so that you have something to go on. I've had students where they've got their paper in front of them and they're seized up. And they have this staring contest with a blank piece of paper. And I know that, I know how that feels. So I can sympathize, but when we get basic information down and know that almost all of these lines could well be thrown away in our process. So from here, I might start putting a little bit more detail. And you can see that I have a death grip on this pencil. Well, now it really looks like a plow. And so this thing tends to take shape as we engage with what this flower is. Someone compared this, one of my students at one time compared it to a ship coming toward you through the fog. And I thought that was a very, very good analogy. As we start with this basic information, as it comes closer, we add detail. So take a little snapshot of that in your mind, and then take a look at some of the crisp, detailed pictures that I've got here, some drawings that I've got here that are ready, but they're ready to transfer onto the web. So I think we've pretty much thrashed our subject for today, but we wanted to open it up for any questions and answers. Anybody in that?
How do you think? Oh, thank you. How do you the saddle and molds that you use to? How many of those do you have, and are there different sizes?
The framework, that what we call a saddle tree, those are custom made. I get those made in a one-man shop in New Zealand, of all places. Actually by a classically trained, he's been in business since 1969, so been doing it a long time, and actually learned most of what he knows, I understand, here in the Northwest of the US. And also interestingly, the wood that he's using is Northwest American Douglas fir. And he's been able to secure some salvaged timbers that is what we call oak growth timber that's well cured, and put it on a boat for New Zealand, and he's sitting on a lifetime supply of salvaged lumber. So it's repurposed. So it's grown here, old growth, who knows how old it may be, shipped to New Zealand, made into saddle trees, comes back to me in Idaho, and I make saddles on it.
When you're doing saddle structure, because the saddles, the saddles in terms of their conformation, because the horse's conformation has changed so dramatically as they've gotten wider and I guess just thicker, healthier maybe over the years. So you look at the early saddles from, let's say, even the turn of the last century, and they're high back and they're really narrow. So, but the saddles that you are making for TCA, they basically have a lot of the attributes and the exquisite tooling of the earlier saddles that you've done. They would conform to the physical nature of a contemporary horse.
Yep. Yeah, a lot of those saddles you're talking about, say 1930-ish, pre-1930 or so, yeah, those were slab-sided horses, and sometimes what we would call an 87-degree bar, that angle, in order to fit that type of horse. And nowadays we're 90 degrees or better sometimes on that. It doesn't sound like a lot, but if you set that's just that 3 degrees difference is, especially on somebody who uses their saddles a lot, is very noticeable. So yeah, all of those would be contemporary conformation on horses.
I have so many questions. I have so many questions, but to start with, can you talk a little bit about how you transfer from the rendering to the leather itself?
Good question. So I go from the paper to some tracing film. And from the film, then it's transferred onto the leather with a stylus. And so my good friend Chuck Storms in Alberta, he would say, well, you silly boy, why don't you just draw on the film? And I guess I'm just old school about paper. I just like the tooth, you know, of paper. And I know that they've got films that have that same kind of tooth, but I subscribe to the old school methods. The other benefit, though, I would say, is that every time you transfer, so I'm transferring it twice, from the paper to the film, from the film to the leather, I'm not doing that mindlessly. I'm looking at my composition and taking a look at my negative space, my balance, all of those kind of things, and I'm making modifications. I make modifications all the way to when I cut it. I make modifications if it looks like, oh, I need to make this little leaf structure a little fuller right here in order to do X, Y, Z, then I make modifications, game time decisions on that.
How about with the hand stitching, that you said you studied in Europe, do you punch first before you put is that what you do?
Yeah, we use an awl. It's it's an awl. It's what I call a diamond point awl. That actually, it doesn't punch a hole. It cuts a hole. Cuts a diamond shaped hole, and we use a 2-needle setup. The needle's thread passes through the same hole, making the same type of stitch on the front and the back. So that's what I learned in saddle school back in 1982, and it was exactly the same process, that part, as what we learned in France.
I think that's called a cross stitch. Or I think it's called. I was gonna say, I think it's called a cross stitch, but she said saddle stitch.
Saddle stitch probably would be the cross stitch. That's what my grandmother did. And my mom, you know, that with the little circle and cross stitching. That's what I think of when I hear cross stitching.
I have a question about leather.
Yeah.
It seems to me that leather has a shiny sort of finished top edge, and beneath that is sort of fibrous.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're carving that, how are you getting the finished product to look so smooth?
Carving is probably, I mean, I use that term often, but it's synonymous mostly with stamping, tooling. Those are two of the things that are interchangeable. And we're not actually removing any leather. So we're compressing the leather, making textures in different ways. When we bevel, we're compressing. You've got this cut, we're compressing one side of that cut. And that makes for that 3-dimensional effect that we find interesting in our composition. So, but leathers, it's the same cellular structure as our skin. Exactly, you've got epidermis, and then you've got the next layer down, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, it's structured. And interestingly, too, hermit oak leather. Hope I'm not talking out of turn here, but in their slow process of neutralizing their leathers, going from an unhairing process to a neutralizing process is very slow compared to a lot of tanneries. Why? So that they retain the enamel. I didn't know that until some years ago, that we actually have an enamel, a very, very thin, perhaps microscopic, and it gives us a sheen. And they want to retain that quality in their leathers. The only tannery I know of that does that.
And so the leather must be fairly thick in order for you to compress it and change it.
A full thickness of what we call skirting leather could be anywhere from a 1/4 inch thick to probably almost 3/8 of an inch thick, and depending on where it is in the side of leather. So yeah, and then on the accessory things, that's split, same tannage, but it's what they call dry split, and they'll split off down to cigarette paper thin leather with just that epidermis, the very top layer.
How did you start your work with leather?
How did I start?
Yes.
I got a tandy kit in 1971 from my parents for Christmas, and the rest is history.
Wow. How old were you when you started?
About 11. And I got my first professional job in a shop when I was 19, and built my first saddle when I was 23.
So
And I'm 66 now.
between 11 and 19, before you were working with somebody, were you making different kinds of projects, or were you constantly making stuff?
I quickly outgrew the kit, you know, the kind of the canned projects, and started doing all manner of things. At that time, I got into black powder shooting and those popsicle bags and mountain men stuff. Soft leathers mostly, but I did a lot of tooling, some belts and things like that when I was a teenager, just as a hobby, of course. Well,
Here, I have one last question. What's the difference between, what's the difference between tooling and carving, or the words used interchangeably for the same thing?
pretty much interchangeably. When I went to the saddle making school under Jesse Smith in 1982, built my first saddle in 82, he called it carving. And then Chuck, Don King, those guys, it was stamping. They call it stamping, but to me, stamping kind of denotes like a basket stamp, a set stamp type of thing. So we toggle back and forth from the different things, and it's all in what you get used to. Tooling probably that's the tandy term. That would be a tandy term that we've heard before. It's probably actually the most accurate.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to listen.
Sorry about the technical difficulties.